Tonight, forecasters warn of what they're calling a Frankenstorm. Hurricane Sandy, now battering the islands of the Caribbean, is expected to join forces with a pre-winter storm from the west and slam the East Coast. Meteorologist David Bernard will have the latest. Election Day turns into election month.
We need you guys to come out and vote.
As the Obama and Romney campaigns push voters to vote early, Dean Reynolds is in the battleground of Ohio. The family of the Pakistani girl shot for standing up to the Taliban travels to Britain to be at her side. Mark Phillips has the latest on her fight for life. And what's killing America's bats? Seth Doane takes us inside the Bat Cave, where scientists are battling a deadly enemy.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Forecasters are watching two storm systems tonight that are expected to team up and hit the East Coast as something of a superstorm. One storm is moving in from the west. The other is Hurricane Sandy, now over the Bahamas and heading north. Highest sustained winds 105 miles an hour. This is how the hurricane looks from space. Here is what it's doing on Earth. Flooding streets in Haiti, sending waves crashing onto the shore in Cuba and knocking down trees and buildings. Where this Cuban is walking, a house once stood. Sandy is blamed for at least 4 deaths in the Caribbean. Meteorologist David Bernard is our CBS News hurricane consultant. And David, where is Sandy headed?
Well, that's the million-dollar question right now, Scott, that everybody wants to know. And as you mentioned, let's look at where Sandy is right now. It's in the Bahamas. It's a powerful Category 2 storm with 105-mile-per-hour winds. And the thinking is it's going to kind of scoot parallel to the East Coast through Sunday and be east of the Outer Banks of North Carolina by then. But the real key is, when does this forecasted turn back to the left happen? That could be Monday or Tuesday, anywhere from the mid-Atlantic to southern New England. So what does that mean for us? That means there's the possibility of storm force winds, major coastal flooding, power outages, and then inland areas in the higher terrain regions, say of western Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. We could be looking at some significant snows. How bad that coastal flooding is will depend exactly how strong the storm is and the exact location where it makes landfall.
But David, why does it make that left turn you're talking about?
Well, that's the real tricky part of this, and it's the very unusual aspect of this storm. In fact, what we have across the Atlantic right now, we are looking at what we call a big block. And basically, it's a roadblock. It's preventing anything from turning back out to sea. You remember, even Irene last year, I moved up along the coast parallel, but then scooted on out. That central Atlantic block is going to probably force the storm westward, and you see that cold pool, Scott, that's over the eastern United States. That's the winter storm you were referring to. You take all that tropical energy, all that heat from the tropics, you combine it with winter cold. That's an explosive ingredient in the atmosphere, and that's why we think this storm has so much potential. I really encourage everybody to pay attention to what their local emergency management officials tell them as we go into the weekend.
David, thanks very much. The last major hurricane to hit the U.S. this late in the season was Wilma 7 years ago today. That was a Category 3 storm. It killed 5 people in Florida and caused more than $20 billion in damage. It's the third costliest hurricane in the U.S. after Andrew and Katrina. We are down to the last 12 days of campaign 2012. A new poll out tonight suggests that Mitt Romney has closed the gender gap. Last month, President Obama led among women by 16 points, but now they're dead even, 47% to 47. On the other hand, Governor Romney's lead among men has been cut from 13 points last month to just 5 now, 47% to 42. Most polls show the president ahead in Ohio, and it may be Ohio that tips the balance on election night. Both men were there today, and so is our Campaign 2012 team. First, Jan Crawford with Governor Romney in Defiance, Ohio. Jan?
Well, Scott, Romney was in 4 different toss-up states yesterday. Today, he's spending every minute in one, Ohio. He doesn't have to win this state to win the election, but it's going to be hard for him to do it without it.
On November 6th, I'm counting on Ohio to vote for big change.
He's hoping to see a change here in Ohio, a state that Mr. Obama won by 4 points in 2008 and one that's proven difficult for Romney to crack. The latest CBS News poll has him down by 5 points, 50 to 45%, perhaps because he's been hit since the spring by a flood of negative advertising in the state because of his opposition to the auto bailout. But crossing Ohio today, the Romney campaign claimed it has momentum. The same poll shows Romney has a strong edge in voter enthusiasm, which is a factor in turnout. And he's leading among independents, up by 7 points in the CBS poll, 49 to 42%. In 2008, Mr. Obama won that group by 8 over John McCain. At a rally near Columbus, Romney made a direct appeal to independents, hitting Mr. Obama for failing to solve America's problems.
They have not been able to define an agenda to get this economy going, to defend an agenda. In fact, the president's out of ideas and he's out of excuses, and that's why in November you're going to make sure and vote him out of office.
Now, Romney won't be gone from Ohio for long. He's got campaign stops tomorrow in Iowa, then he'll be back here tomorrow night. The campaign knows it's still got work to do to win over those independents and Democrats who voted for the president 4 years ago, but may not now. Scott?
Jan, one prominent Republican who voted for Mr. Obama 4 years ago, endorsed him again today. Colin Powell, the former Secretary of State, made the announcement on CBS this morning.
I think this is an exciting race between two very, very capable men, and I signed on for a long patrol with President Obama, and I don't think this is the time to make such a sudden change. And not only am I not comfortable with what Governor Romney is proposing for his economic plan, I have concerns about his views in foreign policy.
And after that, Mr. Obama telephoned Secretary Powell to thank him for his endorsement. Nancy Cordes is with the president in Cleveland tonight. Nancy?
Scott, the president is in the 35th hour of a marathon 8-state campaign swing that culminates tonight here in Cleveland. He's losing his voice, and that's kind of the point, to show that he's willing to go the extra mile, or in this case, 7,300 extra miles, to earn a second term.
I'm just going to keep on keeping on. Until every single person out there who needs to vote is going to go vote.
Bearing a simple message, vote early, the president boarded Air Force One yesterday morning bound for Iowa, then Colorado, California, and Nevada.
If you're not going to sleep, you might as well be in Vegas.
He spent the night flying back across the country to start the day in Tampa, Florida. By the time he arrived in Richmond, Virginia, he could barely deliver his signature catchphrase.
Are you fired up? Are you ready to go? I'm sorry, are you fired up?
From there, it was on to his hometown of Chicago, where Mr. Obama became the first sitting president to cast his ballot early.
I'm just glad I renewed my driver's license.
And when he was done, he urged others to follow his example.
For all of you who have not yet early voted, I just want everybody to see what an incredibly efficient process this was.
There are two reasons the Obama campaign is pushing early voting so hard among its supporters. First of all, it creates the image of momentum if you're doing better than your opponent. And second of all, Democratic voters tend to be more sporadic, less reliable voters, and early voting gives them more opportunities to go to the polls. Scott?
Well, Nancy, listen to this. The president is among an estimated 7.2 million people who have already voted. More than half of those early voters are in 7 of the states that could swing either way. 813,000 votes have already been cast in Ohio alone, where Dean Reynolds tells us no voter is safe from the campaign stalkers.
You voted? All right, make sure you get everyone you know to vote.
If you're a registered voter in Youngstown, Ohio, chances are you will meet Dave Beatrice.
Anyone need to vote? Anyone need to vote?
As chairman of the Mahoning County Democrats, he will personally drive you on the Obama Express, then guide you and even push you to the polls to vote early.
Is he going to early vote?
Yeah. Combing neighborhoods like a fisherman hauling in a catch.
Did you vote yet? We want to remove every impediment there is for everyone to be able to exercise their constitutional rights and vote. Polls are open until 7 now.
He's haunted by the 2000 election and wants to keep Ohio from becoming the new Florida.
People say one vote doesn't make a difference, Dean. 537 votes. 537 and 37 votes made George Bush the president.
This is really the last yard, isn't it? I mean,
It is the last yard, and it is the hardest yard.
what happens if Romney wins?
I'm afraid of that, and I don't want to think of that.
Miles away on a different bus, Scott Jennings is working to make that happen.
We see people who sometimes miss elections coming out, taking advantage of early voting, and that's helping us close the gap with Democrats.
What we really hope is then you'll show up on Election Day and help us volunteer.
Jennings runs Mitt Romney's campaign in Ohio and is focused on early voting, scheduling a series of get-out-the-vote rallies across the state, hoping to identify who has and has not cast a ballot.
Sometime this week, we will have eclipsed our 6 millionth voter contact. Sometime this week, we'll knock on our 2 millionth door.
We're going to make sure we win here in Ohio, and when we do,
And we've been having 8, 9, 10, 12,000 people at some of these rallies. That's 8, 9, 10, 12,000 people that I can talk to about voting, volunteering, donating, and generally getting involved in the campaign.
And according to our survey, the latest survey of people who have already voted here in Ohio, Scott, the president leads Governor Romney 54 to 39%.
Now, Dean, you've been watching things for us in Ohio for the last month or so. What have you seen that has impressed you in the last few days?
Scott, what's gotten our attention here is how eager people are to take advantage of the opportunity to vote early. At this polling place behind me, people have been lining up, some of them waiting as much as an hour to vote.
Dean, thanks very much. Last night, David Martin broke the story that U.S. military forces were alerted when terrorists attacked the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya last month. The U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans were killed. It was the anniversary of 9/11. Today, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, asked the Obama administration for details of military options that might have been considered that night. It's all become controversial in light of the election. Tonight, David has learned more about the military's response.
2.5 hours after the attack began, an unarmed Predator drone was diverted from a surveillance mission over another part of Libya to the consulate in Benghazi. That, plus a second unarmed drone dispatched 4 hours and 15 minutes later, were the only U.S. military forces sent to the scene of the attack. Commandos were dispatched from Europe to an airfield in Sigonella, Sicily, but by the time they got there, the attack in Benghazi was over. Defense Secretary Panetta today defended the U.S. military response, saying the situation on the ground was too confusing.
You don't deploy forces into harm's way without knowing what's going on, without having some real-time information about what's taking place.
He said senior officers, including General Carter Ham, the U.S. Commander for Africa, and General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all opposed military intervention.
General Ham, General Dempsey, and I felt very strongly that we could not put forces at risk in that situation.
The attack occurred on the anniversary of 9/11.
Did you have forces on any heightened alert in that area because of the approaching anniversary?
We did.
Yeah, and let me point out, it was 9/11 everywhere in the world.
Defense officials say a general alert had been issued to U.S. forces worldwide, but no special alert for Libya because there was no intelligence predicting an attack.
David, thank you. 2 Americans are dead after another insider attack in Afghanistan. We'll have an update on the 15-year-old who was shot by the Taliban for her campaign to get girls in school. Authorities in Pakistan say 6 men have been detained in connection with the attack on Malala Yousafzai, the 15-year-old who stood up for the rights of girls to go to school despite threats from the Taliban. The man who shot her in the head is still on the loose. Last week, Malala was flown to Britain for treatment. Mark Phillips is in Birmingham tonight. And Mark, Malala's parents arrived in Birmingham today. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, they arrived this afternoon on a flight from Pakistan. 4 members of her family, her father, her mother, and 2 brothers arrived here. The father saying, by the way, that he had been honored in his words at the outpouring internationally of sympathy for his daughter. But of course, as a father now, his main concern was for her welfare, and that's why they've come here. Interestingly as well, she apparently asked that he bring school books that were not taken when she was first brought here. So her thirst for education continues despite it all, that of course being the reason the Taliban shot her in the first place.
Sounds like a good sign, though. What do you know about her condition?
The hospital puts out a daily bulletin saying that she's comfortable and responding to treatment. Staff here at the hospital say that she has made, in fact, what they call a dramatic recovery, considering what she's been through. The families say, by the way, that they intend to return to Pakistan once the treatment here is finished, including the reconstructive surgery that she'll begin soon, that they haven't gone through all of this to give up now, and that they'll go back despite the Taliban threats. The Pakistani government says this time, when it offers security to the family, as it has in the past, it won't take no for an answer.
Mark, thank you. In Afghanistan, 2 U.S. troops were killed today in what appears to be another insider attack. A man in an Afghan police uniform shot the Americans on a morning patrol. 35 Americans have been killed this year in attacks by Afghan allies. We heard a remarkable moment from history today. Wonder what they chose to read to make the earliest recording of an American voice? You'll hear it when we come back. There was a public viewing today in South Dakota for George McGovern, the former senator who lost the 1972 presidential election to Richard Nixon. Members of the Patriot Guard Motorcycle Club stood at attention. They were there to honor McGovern's heroic service as a bomber pilot in World War II. Inside, mourners paused to pay their respects. McGovern died Sunday. He was 90. It was 134 years ago that a speaker whose identity is lost to history made what is believed to be the first audio recording in America. What did he choose to read? Mary Had a Little Lamb. Listen closely. The recording was created on a sheet of tinfoil and played on a phonograph invented by Thomas Edison. The stylus would usually destroy the tinfoil after a few turns, so this recording, rough as it is considered to be a treasure. Bats of a very different kind are the subject of our final story tonight, the battle to save them. Next. Finally tonight, bats get a bad rap, especially around Halloween. But farmers love them because they feast on some of the pets that destroy crops. But now, a mysterious fungus is killing the bats by the millions. Seth Doan has our story.
This is one of the entrances to the Bellamy Cave system.
Corey Holliday of the Nature Conservancy took us to a Tennessee cave that's the winter home to 160,000 endangered gray bats that could be extinct within a decade from white nose syndrome.
This is a wildlife disease. It's unprecedented in our history.
Scientists are still mystified by this fungus, which shows up as a white powdery residue and disturbs the bats' natural sleeping pattern.
Basically causes bats to use up their energy that they've stored to get them through the winter. They come out of hibernation early before there's any food available and while it's still very cold, and they don't make it through the winter.
White nose was first discovered in 4 caves in New York back in 2006. Now it's in 19 states and moving further west every year. Researchers are doing everything from tagging bats to understand migration patterns to a project at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, where 200 bats have been intentionally infected with the fungus to try to develop a possible treatment.
We've never seen a disease like this.
Ann Froschauer is with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which coordinates the patchwork of research programs.
How is it to go into one of these caves where you've seen a huge die-off of bats?
Yeah, it's pretty grim. You're looking in and it looks like a carpet of pine needles on the floor of the cave, except for that it's not pine needles, it's all bones.
Yeah, we're going to close it off. We've got double doors.
Corey Holliday and the Nature Conservancy are so concerned about the Tennessee gray bat that they're taking a dramatic $300,000 gamble, building a first-of-its-kind man-made bat cave.
The bats will come, hibernate in the wintertime. After they leave in the spring, we can go in and clean the fungus out of the artificial cave.
Scientists hope by keeping the cave clean, they'll be able to slow the spread of the disease.
How many bats do you hope will hibernate in here?
Well, eventually, we could easily sustain 10 to 20,000. There's enough surface area, really, for 200,000.
If it works, other artificial caves could be built elsewhere, which might help save hundreds of thousands of America's most endangered bats. Seth Doan, CBS News, Stewart County, Tennessee.
And that's the CBS Evening News for tonight. For all of us at CBS News all around the world, good night.